The editor I'm going to use in this course is Visual Studio Code, which is a free editor. It's become very popular. You can code in a lot of different languages using Visual Studio Code, but we are going to use Visual Studio Code for our HTML, our CSS, and our JavaScript file. So to get that program, you need to go to code.visualstudio.com. And when you get there, you should land on this page and you can click the button that says download for Windows. When you do that, it'll say thanks for downloading and your download will start. I'm going to cancel mine because I've already downloaded it to save time. It's not a very big file. It doesn't take that long. I'm on a slow connection at my home, so I don't want to wait on it. But you can go through here and you can read everything you might want to know about this. I am going to give you the basic installation, and we will talk about some things as we go, and I will introduce more and more features to you as we go through there, but you can learn a lot more by reading Visual Studio Code. Read their documentation. They'll tell you everything you want to know. They'll make you an expert. So once that file's downloaded, we just need to double click it to start it up. We can say, I accept the agreement. It's free, but we have to agree to their terms in order to use it. It will give you a default application folder where it's going to install. Installs locally for each user. So if you install it for you and somebody else logs onto your computer, they probably will not see it. They'll need to install it separately. But again, it's a very small installation. I believe it's actually written in JavaScript. We'll take the default here for the shortcut menus. I would highly suggest add Open with Code action to Windows Explorer and File Context menu, and also add Open with Code action to the Windows Explorer Directory Context menu. It makes it really convenient if you want to open a file in VS Code to just right click on say Open with VS Code, rather than having to go start the program separately, going to File, Open, and browsing all over to get those files. If you want, you can create a desktop icon. Register code as an editor for its supported file types. I would leave that on, and I would absolutely leave the path statement there. Don't uncheck that box. And then we'll go ahead and click Install. And once it's done, it will ask us if we want to launch Visual Studio Code, and we will for this case. Bring it up. And I have a file open because I've already been using this. Close that folder. Go back. So when it comes up, you'll see this. You'll probably actually see this. This should be Explorer should be open by default. This icon in the upper left is the Explorer. When we have that selected, we can see the folders and files in the directory we are working on. They will appear here. We don't have any open yet. You saw that I had some open when I started the video. But we have the option to open a folder or to clone a repository. And if you haven't watched the Git videos yet, I talk about Git and GitHub, and we will learn how to use Visual Studio Code to clone our repos and push them back up right from inside here, so that you don't have to use the commands. But it is always helpful to use the commands to understand them. All right, we have a search button here. We have our source control, which is what we'll be using with our repos. If you haven't watched those videos, you will here soon. We have a run and debug button. And then the one I would really want to talk about for the remainder of this video is the extensions. You can see I have some extensions installed here, and I would highly suggest that you install these 3 extensions because I've needed them already for this course. And the first one is HTML CSS support. Some of these could be installed by default. I have been using this for a while. I don't remember what's installed by default and what's not anymore. But HTML and CSS support gives you IntelliSense. If you've done C# programming already, if you've done your C# programming class, if you've used Visual Studio, the full-blown version, not Visual Studio Code, but full-blown Microsoft Visual Studio, you'll know what IntelliSense is. But you've also probably seen it if you used a Python editor in your Python course. And that's the idea that when you start typing a command, it kind of tries to do an autocomplete for you. This adds support for HTML and CSS tags. So how do you find these extensions? Well, there's a little search bar right here. So if I was trying to find the HTML and CSS extension, I would type HTML, and it gives me a list of all these different extensions people have written. They really have done a great job of making Visual Studio Code open source. People can write their own extensions. And I'm scrolling, you can see my scroll bar hasn't moved far. There are just thousands and thousands and thousands of extensions. So the question then becomes, which one do you want to use? Which ones do you want to get? And I will give you a guideline. One, HTML and CSS is a pretty good one. HTML, CSS support. But you can also evaluate. When you click on it, it will tell you information about it. If you haven't installed it, you'll have an install button. Or since I have it installed, I have an uninstall button. But we can look up here. This has 13 million reviews, and it's still got 4 stars. That's pretty good. 13 million people using it with high reviews. That's a good indication that this is a pretty good plugin or extension. There are some out there that are not that way, so be careful. It's easy to uninstall these extensions if you get one you don't like. It's not a big deal. So HTML, CSS support, definitely do a quick search for that. Click on the install button and it will install it. And it just helps you when you're trying to apply an ID or a class to Visual Studio Code. It'll automatically pop up. One of those handy little tools you're probably going to want. If I clear out my search, I can go back and see the ones I have installed. Here's the other two I would suggest for now. Open in browser. This has 7 million installs and it's pretty highly rated. This just adds a little link so that when we have files open in VS Code, we can right click and say open in your browser. That's really important when you're editing HTML and CSS and JavaScript. If you want to test your page, the best way to do it is to open it in the browser. So rather than having to leave Visual Studio Code to get to that, you can just right click and say open the web browser. That's it. It's just a little extension that adds a nice tiny little tool that does something good for you. And the other one I have installed is this vscode.pdf. It's got almost 3 million installs. It's got 5 stars. Basically, sometimes I include PDF files in the repos that show you examples of things or whatever. This will let you, if it's in your files here and you click on the PDF, it will allow you to preview them right inside VS Code rather than having to open them in another application. So you can do a search for any of those 3 and you'll learn the ones that you like, the ones that you don't like, other things that you might want to add in later. You're free to do that, but those are the 3 that I'm starting out with for this course. All right, so go ahead and get your Visual Studio Code installed, get some of your extensions installed, and I will see you in the next video.